The Marvel Cinematic Universe is kind of the biggest thing that's ever happened in Hollywood. Even that kind of feels like an understatement. It's a cultural phenomenon. As of me writing this, for better or worse, there's 29 unique films, 20 different TV shows, and a seemingly infinite amount of things on the horizon. You know, now that we're getting features on lesser known Marvel superheroes like Moon Knight and Ironheart, there's likely going to be a big blockbusted Hollywood production for you. Will Disney be able to make a good version of the Dark Phoenix saga or Fantastic Four now that they ate Fox? Probably not, but maybe my Cajun brethren Gambit will exist. So with one of the most successful film franchises and highly profitable things ever, there'd obviously be video games, but there really aren't. Well, at least not anymore. Pretty much every Marvel-related film prior to the MCU had itself a video game tie-in. X-Men the official game, Eric Bana's Hulk, Daredevil on the Game Boy Advance, and don't forget Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. A game and a movie that sucked. Still wild to me that the Human Torch became Captain America. Wow. You'd think with how much notoriety the MCU has, we'd be seeing movie tie-ins for like Thor, a spy action game for Black Widow, or even a janky third-person shooter for Doctor Strange, but it just didn't happen. But once upon a time in the late 2000s, it did, and I want to talk about it. Sega across Marvel Cinematic Universe.
So yo, it's Austin, and today we're talking about the mini Sega Marvel Cinematic Universe video games. And by many, I mean a lot. This isn't really a thing these days because there's less consoles and options to play things on, but back then it was like the height of different versions of games that would all share the same box art. It's kind of similar to the James Cameron Avatar thing, where there were 4 games that all had the same box, but were completely different. Truly a wild time that's not totally confusing, with plenty of games to eat up. And speaking of eating, how about a word from today's sponsor, Factor. When you're out saving the world or just living that busy lifestyle and you come home, you want to eat something quick and easy, but also something that's not terrible for you. Well, that's where Factor comes in. Factor is the deliverable meal kit that comes to you once a week with pre-prepared low-calorie, vegetarian, vegan, and keto meals. There's highly customizable choices each week that'll suit any diet. Toss it in the oven or microwave, have a nice wholesome meal, and be on your way. This week I'm eating several things, but I was a really big fan of the home-style ground beef and chive potato mash. It's really good. They also have their plant-based smoothies, which have become a really regular part of my diet. These things are refreshing and they're good for you. With Factor, there's no prep, no mess, and with the busy fall season coming up, you might want it. Factor's also owned by HelloFresh now, so if you put 2 of these together, and I've been sponsored by both, there's plenty of options for you to have at a really good price. So my dear viewer, if you want to start eating healthy today, head on over to go.factor75.com/eruption130 and use the code eruption130 to get $130 off across your first 6 boxes. I literally just ate one. It's good. Thanks to Factor for the sponsor, but for now, MCU video games. I'm not kidding when I say there's a lot of them. There's 15 individual games we're going to be talking about. So let's go chronological and get started with none other than Iron Man.
I don't really remember the initial announcement of the MCU or even the original Iron Man. I would have been 16 and playing World of Warcraft. Generally, Marvel movies around this time weren't known for their quality. Things were unconnected, made by different film studios, and oftentimes awful. The superhero film, pre-Iron Man and Dark Knight, was usually a toss-up with people side-eyeing the actors for doing it. Spider-Man, X-Men, and Batman Begins definitely changed that perception, but when you got like Batman and Robin and Daredevil holding down the fort, yeah, I mean, when Robert Downey Jr. was announced to be playing the role of Iron Man, paparazzi and entertainment reporters were like, huh? Why? The stigma was real. I mean, this is the entire setup of the film Birdman, which is great, by the way. With Marvel taking their movie initiative into their own hands, they'd want to select a single publisher to take on the task of movie tie-in video games, and for some reason, they decided to go with Sega. Sega had both published and developed some older Marvel superhero games back in the 90s, but this was another level for sure. In April of 2007, both companies would put out a press release announcing their partnership and stating that, quote, "We look forward to working closest with them over the next few years to maximize the potential of these franchises in the interactive entertainment space." Spoilers! Potential maximized. Anyone who's followed video games at all in the last 12 years already knew this, but most of these games were not received well at all. Licensed games were already notorious, but I venture to say that this venture doomed the concept even further, making Marvel way more picky about who gets to make their video games. It absolutely doesn't help that around the same time, on the other side of the pond, Batman Arkham Asylum and its sequel City were killer, still hold up to this day, and are some of the best 7th gen games out there. But I digress.
This is the story of one publisher, a ton of different developers, and a bunch of video games that range from alright to maybe good to so bad that I couldn't play it again, so I made my editor do it. I'm sorry. So how about that Iron Man? Or in this case, Iron Men.
On May 2nd, 2008, the same day as the film, Iron Man would come out for the PlayStation 2, Wii, Xbox 360, PSP, PlayStation 3, and the Nintendo DS. Obviously, there's gonna be some differences just on the platforms alone, even though they all had the same cover. This legit feels like false advertising in 2022, but this was just how it was done. So this comes down to 3 different versions. There's a DS version of the game developed by Artificial Mind and Movement. There's one for the PlayStation 2, Wii, PSP, and PC, also developed by A2M. Then there's the big boy console version on the 360 and PlayStation 3 developed by Secret Level. Secret Level was a studio that Sega owned with a focus on Western development. Besides Iron Man, they put out Final Fight Streetwise and Golden Axe Beast Riders, so that's a good sign. You might have noticed I said that the PC version of Iron Man wasn't the PlayStation 3 and 360 one. It's the A2M version, and we might as well start with that. Iron Man for the 6th generation of video game consoles and PSP. We're gonna be playing it on the Wii though, because I feel like this is the truest comic book hero experience that we can have. Point, aim, truly feel like Iron Man. Except not really, because this game has tiny levels. As you'd probably expect, an Iron Man game is a third-person shooter that has you blasting dudes with your repulsors as you complete whatever objectives are thrown your way. You start similarly to the movie, in a dark cave kidnapped by terrorists, where Tony does the whole rich, scrappy billionaire playboy thing and creates himself a suit to escape. Except all the backstory from the movie's not there, and you just jump right into it with no context whatsoever. Gotta love the title screen of a transparent PNG in a black background. Classic. We've also got full cutscenes, one that have T. Stark staring longingly with some ill-inspired voice delivery.
They attacked us because they wanted the inventory stored here, so it's obvious. No more weapons. No more attacks.
No!
And in case you were wondering, yes, that is Robert Downey Jr. In fact, they got several of the original actors to reprise their roles for the video game. Although Jeff Bridges and Goop Paltrow managed to escape. I don't know how they managed to, voice themselves and sound like a sound-alike, but they managed to do it. Most of the time, it's just kind of awkward. The game itself, it's alright. There's an initial variety since the first mission has you in the prototype suit that Tony built before taking things to a much bigger scale with the movie suits. But it's still linear levels as opposed to an open world, and also Superman 64 rings. Always. You can't escape. But all that's fair considering this is something that was also made for the PSP. The trade-off because of that is that while flying is pretty decent and fun to do, it's severely underutilized because the stages don't support that kind of zooming around. I think anyone would have wanted that scale and speed that you'd see in like a Sonic game coming from Sega, but this previous generation version of this doesn't really have that. Oh, and since we're playing the Wii version, get ready to waggle a lot and get ready to fail them too, because this thing is hypersensitive. There's a lot of QTEs in general, especially if you run low on health or need to recharge to generate health. It's simple, but easy to mess up the timing. The biggest issues I have, besides the time that it hard froze on me and I had to replay the longest level in the game, are the pure repetition and monotony of what they're having you do. A majority of every mission has you circling around an arena, blasting 1 or 2 objectives, and hoping you got them all so the next mission can start. And if you're like me, you might just be running around trying to figure out what to shoot. Some of the set pieces are pretty neat, like a giant iceberg or a flying fortress. I would have liked to see more of this, where you're blasting a massive objective from the inside and outside, but instead we spend way too much doing small things like escort missions. Follow this truck for 15 minutes? Blow things up attacking the truck? Sit and wait for 300 years? Got it. Iron Man. The plot of the game, vaguely follows the movie. It starts off the same and then deviates into something else, loops back around again, and then kind of pulls it all together. Since they didn't have the likeness for Jeff Bridges, the entire Ironmonger character simply exists as a boss at the end. Do the thing, shoot some force lasers, hear the Black Sabbath song, and call it quits after 4 hours tops. A very run-of-the-mill movie tie-in, but it's one that has some fun suit unlocks that are total throwback. Overall, it's not great. In 2008, we already had way better licensed games on the PlayStation 2, like Van Helsing and some of the Harry Potter games. Heck, even Artificial Mind and Movement could do better with Scalar or Teen Titans.
Moving on, let's talk about the DS version. We're gonna be saving the big boy for last, but how about a twin stick shooter?
Yep, that's what we got. But obviously, since the original Nintendo DS didn't have 2 analog sticks, you'd be using the touchscreen and a stylus or greasy finger in order to aim. This handheld didn't actually have too many of these, so it's nice to see genre representation on the small screen. The game itself is extremely basic though. Also developed by A2M, this definitely feels like they just had to throw something together to hit the SKU count. It follows the plot of the film just as vaguely as the PlayStation 2 version, but actually feels a bit more solid, probably due to its smaller scale. There's 2 types of modes, one where you shoot stuff while flying around and some on foot that feel different enough, even if some of the on foot segments suddenly become Crash Bandicoot. It's fully voiced, maybe even to a higher quality than the console one, and it's pretty okay for a, licensed handheld game. Although seeing the story screenshots where it looks like someone cut Tony out and put him in is a bit unnerving. Like he's got a black stroke on him. I think if I was a kid when this came out and not, 18 and party rocking at the Denny's, this would have ruled.
So instead, let's focus on one that I did play at that time via rental. No way was I gonna spend my hard-earned money on something like a licensed game back then. Are you kidding me? Not until X-Men Origins Wolverine would I be so daring. The final piece of Sega's first excursion into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Iron Man for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3.
They attacked us because they wanted the inventory stored here, so it's obvious. No more.
Wait, this is the same cutscene, except slightly better looking? What? This is a little bizarre. I guess they were feeling one and done with the cutscenes because the story and even level structure of this version of Iron Man is identical to the Wii and PlayStation 2 ones. Same amount of missions, same exact mission names. However, the gameplay, the design, the levels, the scale, and everything is extremely different. The devs' secret level decided that they were going to try and take advantage of this brand new shiny hardware and give us an experience that felt more in line with what you would expect. High speeds, big open maps, and a much heavier emphasis on flight. You're tackling similar objectives in similar areas, but it's way more fleshed out and, well, big. They just unfortunately didn't stick the landing. You've got different weapons, melee attacks, missiles, repulsor blasts, and of course, quick time events, but the most effective way to play this game has you looking like a dingus. You'll be hovering around blasting various targets that appear on your GPS while tapping the triggers to make Iron Man go up and down looking like a kid playing with a toy. The screen feels like a massive cluster, and there's not much to do besides going to your current highlighted objective and blasting it out of the sky. The upgrades you get feel meh at best, and considering this game can be beaten in 3 hours, it's just as shallow and forgettable as the previous gen version. Don't forget about crappy frame rate, long loading times, and awful slowdown. It's like a supreme pizza of bad games. I've said this before, many have agreed, but Sega's Iron Man is one of the most disappointing licensed games ever. The concept and hype behind an Iron Man action game is off the charts, and when you look at something like Spider-Man 2 with its massive city to explore and swing around in, you feel it even more. A few of the levels here have this really cool big feeling. I mean, there's even a big city to explore for one. If this was an open world game with little things to do here and there, I think it would have been received way better. But instead, it was dunked on everywhere, proudly holding the GameSpot award for both worst game everyone played and worst use of a great license. 2 things that are very true, especially considering how well the movie was received. This just kind of sucked. But hey, I guess none of that matters considering all versions of Iron Man together sold over 2.5 million copies. The power of licensed games. Playing all 3 of these now, they're mediocre, and in the case of the PlayStation 3 version, extremely disappointing. I think just about anyone out there would want a fun Iron Man game. It's a concept that sells itself. It's too repetitious and uninspired to really hit that mark. But at least the cutscenes are nice and don't go on for too long.
Of course.
Goodbye, Tony. For now. We'll be circling back around to Iron Man later in this video, but we're tackling things chronologically. So next up, we're going to be talking about a superhero that is no stranger to video games, the Incredible Hulk, a movie that I did not see. Is that okay?
I never really got the Hulk, which is bizarre considering my favorite color is green, and when you're a kid, you see something in a color you like and you go yay with your mouth wide open. So I've decided to bring in an expert on the matter, longtime friend, fellow Onechan enthusiast, and someone who can definitely tell us what happened, Matt McMuscles.
Oh, hey, you said the thing. Nice. That's a 9 out of 10 little intro there, Austin. Thank you.
If you look at things from the outside, the Incredible Hulk is the least successful MCU film by a decent amount. It grossed a fraction of what Iron Man did, its reviews were noticeably lower, and all I've really heard is that it's skippable, similar to the 2003 Ang Lee movie. So hey, Matt, take it away.
Yeah, your comments on the movies are not very far off the mark at all. The Incredible Hulk would be the second peek into the Marvel Cinematic Universe after how popular Iron Man was, so there were a lot of expectations. Especially when you nab a huge name like Edward Norton to star as mega nerd Bruce Banner. If you compare it directly to the 2003 Ang Lee version, it is an improvement but still fails to hit those high highs. Both films suffer from kinda wonky CGI, a lack of attention to any of its characters outside of Bruce, and an insistence on romantic subplots nobody cares about, which hold both films back greatly. How many times are we gonna see the Hulk's rage quelled by Arwen over here? Spoilers, it wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last. As you probably know, Ed Norton got de-Hulked when him and Marvel parted ways due to creative differences, leaving this second entry in the MCU feeling incredibly awkward. In 2022, the Incredible Hulk movie is now a throwaway joke in the She-Hulk show.
I'm a completely different person now, literally.
Remember that final scene where Brucey looked like he was gonna go evil for some reason? No, of course you don't. But of course, this is all about the video games, and the Hulk has had, well, not the most consistent record. If you ever played the Pantheon saga on the PS1, and I'm sorry, you know what I'm talking about. CGI Hulk feet. But somewhere in the middle of all those middle-of-the-road releases is one of the greatest superhero games of all time, The Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction. Developed by Radical Entertainment, who are responsible for Simpsons Hit and Run, Scarface, and later the Prototype franchise, Ultimate Destruction was to Hulk what Spider-Man 2 was to Spider-Man. An absolutely gamma-radiated powerhouse of a game, but its follow-up would be the MCU tie-in, so you can't help but make a direct comparison between the two.
So in June 2008, mere days before the film came out, we would get two different video games. One for the Nintendo DS, which we'll come back around to later, and The Incredible Hulk for the Xbox 360, PC, PS3, Wii, PS2. Got it. Had to check my notes. It's all the same.
Except for the fact that the PC version is also the last generation one. So that makes two games in a row that have PC ports that aren't HD. It's bizarre. All ports of Hulk here were developed by Edge of Reality, the group behind Pitfall: The Lost Expedition, Shark Tale, Over the Hedge, and a few Nintendo 64 ports of Tony Hawk games. There was a lot of initial excitement around these licensed MCU games prior to release, with Edge of Reality putting out pressers and also having the opportunity to put these famous comic book superheroes into playable games. But
it becomes extremely obvious within seconds of playing that they didn't have any experience making this type of game, especially at a scale like this. Simply and harshly put, Incredible Hulk feels like a bad copy and paste job of Ultimate Destruction. Now, it's probably unfair to stack one studio against the other when they have such a huge gulf in experience in making open world games, but it's hard not to, and the predecessor is the blueprint of what one of these should be to this very day. While Iron Man could have benefited from being more of a sandbox, Edge of Reality's Hulk feels like it should have been far more simple. You roam around Manhattan, doing missions, running around, stretching your little blue short shorts, but everything feels so unpolished, sloppy, and beyond the occasional Sonic the Hedgehog billboard, rather lifeless. Granted, the destruction part of the game is spot on, and you do get a ton of abilities, all of which are used to Hulk smash everything around you. Jeez, no one hates public transportation quite like Bruce Stupid Pants Banner.
okay, why are there so many taxis? Is that the first thing that comes to mind when the devs were thinking about New York? Accessible transportation? There's so many.
The story has cutscenes that follow the movie, which, by the way, had less smash and more think, but you only play as the Hulk here, so if you want to solve boring mind teasers, you'll need to go back to the Ang Lee video game adaptation. As for this, while you do get a bunch of moves, your move set is pretty clunky and unsatisfying to use, with one of your most powerful basic attacks being this.
Hope you heard that.
Hulk cares not about physics. If he wants to jump into the air, punch forward, and launch himself an additional 200 feet, well, he can. Oh, and once again, despite all documentation confirming the video game versions of these characters were voiced by the actual actors in the movie, I still think they're sound-alikes.
Nothing could have surprised me more than this unassuming young man shaking my hand.
I appreciate your help, Dr. Stearns, but I'm putting you at terrible risk.
Man, I wish they had scaled this down with more defined levels and memorable set pieces. Imagine high-octane maps where you're always pushing forward with everything exploding around you, culminating in a War of the Monsters style bout between Hulk and Abomination, and yeah, there's the game they should have made. But instead, we're given tons of filler, ugly graphics, additional villains presented with little to no context, and ho-hum minigames, all trying to bulk up the game's length. But even then, it can be beaten in like 6 or 7 hours. Yeah, an open world game that could be completed in single-digit hours, and that's assuming you can make it past the completely random and unfun difficulty spikes.
Having played this now, my favorite part is that you fast travel by going on the New York subway system. They don't show it or anything, it's not like Insomniac Spider-Man, but the thought's funny, I guess. There's some fun to be had here, but all of it gets downplayed when there's just a much better version of this game available on the PlayStation 2 even. Ultimate Destruction rules. The only differences between the major console versions of this, though, are higher res textures, by the way, which also unfortunately comes with the same old frame rate issues, but you kind of expected at this point.
Ultimately, The Incredible Hulk is a licensed game that, similarly to Iron Man, has a lot of potential, but was clearly rushed out to meet the movie's premiere deadline. It's a death sentence 9 out of 10 times, and unfortunately, this is one of those 9 times. Like Austin said, if you want a Hulk game, just go play Ultimate Destruction. It is a little antiquated in some areas, but the core of it is still so goddamn fun. Anyways, I feel the gamma radiation just ebbing out of me, so I'm gonna go lie down. Also, I want to leave before you start talking about that Thor game. That one is not mighty whatsoever. So I'm gone. Bye.
He's not wrong. Thanks to Matt McMuscles for showing up and sharing some Hulk knowledge, but for now, we need to move on to the Nintendo DS version. The one he doesn't know about. The one that's a secret.
I did say we're talking about every MCU game, right? Well, Sega had one more up their sleeve, and for this one, they'd work with Amaze Entertainment, who you might know for some of these. But you know what works for the Hulk? A side-scrolling beat-em-up, like, duh. He's had these before, but the Incredible Hulk for the DS is way better than it has any right to be. Yeah, the game you're looking at right now, the one with Hulk and gladiator armor, shares the same cover as the movie game. It even has some of the same cutscenes, even though they're extremely bit-crushed. So instead of roaming a city, you're given really tightly compact levels, almost designed for speedrunning. You dash forward, smack the living daylights out of everything in front of you, break walls, and, well, Hulk smash. This game goes way beyond the story of the movie into some wild places, sometimes literal years later. Less of a movie tie-in and more of a, screw it, let's put something together. This game is chaotic. It's hard to even imagine this being approved by Sega when it feels closer to like Burnout than the other Hulk game. The second screen has a map showing you what's coming ahead with a timer and smash percentage, so you can really let loose. There's even dash rings like bumpers in Sonic. This is the kind of Marvel Sega game that I wanted. What is it? I'm not sure. Ever wanted to destroy a boss in like 10 seconds? Here's your game. It's like that scene with Loki, but playable. The Incredible Hulk for the DS is a total surprise, and something that I think's been totally forgotten, as most portable versions of multi-platforms have. This is actually worth a shot at some point. I didn't think I'd get to say that this early, but here we are. Shoutouts to Crunchy Liv Tyler and Edward Norton.
I know, but I have to try. I'm sorry.
After The Incredible Hulk, it would be an entire year before we would get another Marvel film, which nowadays sounds ridiculous. These days, phases are all so meticulously planned out, but you can kind of tell with that first one that they were just kind of winging it, which is probably why we got Iron Man 2 back then. And also the video games.
It wasn't even a few days after the first film released that Marvel decided to go all in with announcements. I guess it was a big enough success that they announced Thor, Iron Man 2, Captain America, and the Avengers all at the same time. Which, I mean, yeah, if in 2008 you could fill up theaters across the world for a movie about Iron Man, who, at least in my opinion, at the time wasn't near the tippy top of the superhero spectrum, you could probably do anything. Poor guy didn't even make it into MVC. Now, you'd think that given the notoriety of the first sets of games that Marvel would try try to work with another publisher, but no, they were locked in with Sega, who would announce an Iron Man 2 video game on February 3rd, 2009, a year prior to its release. Sega said that they'd continue to refine its game engine so that players can expect an entirely new and enhanced gameplay experience, which is a bizarre statement to make, but they were definitely aware of the previous game's reception. Fast forward to May 4th, 2010, 3 days prior to the movie's release, and we'd get ourselves a set of 3 completely different Iron Man 2s. One on the 360 and PS3, one for the Nintendo DS, and another for the Wii and PSP. Similar to the first 2, but say goodbye to the PlayStation 2 from here on. Goodbye. This time, things were a little different. I'm not sure if it was at the request of Marvel, Paramount Pictures, or Sega, but they decided to make Iron Man 2's story totally different from the film. Not just that, but it's actually a sequel. Yeah, a video game sequel that came out before the movie. I know. The cool part is that they didn't just get anyone to throw something together, they got Matt Fraction, who's a writer I really enjoy. He wrote Sex Criminals and Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, as well as Invincible Iron Man, so the story is consistent through all 3 versions, and it's in good hands. It also continues to carry likenesses and voice actors from the films, so you got Sam Jackson and Don Cheadle as Nick Fury and the newer, much cheaper Rhodey, and that's it. They might have got RDJ's likeness, but he skipped out this time around and was replaced by Eric Loomis. And he kinda does a better job.
Some genius shows up with an army of killer robots or some other ridiculous scheme for world dominance, and I have to drop everything and knock heads together.
The story doesn't involve anyone from the film or Whiplash. It's about the creation of Ultimo and Protean technology going all haywire. Kinda similar to Ultron, but not really.
We might as well get started with the Wii and PSP version so we can grab our Wiimotes and start swinging around. Except this one was developed by High Voltage Software, who are the people responsible for the Conduit.
That alone had me a bit more excited. These people had experience making a shooter on the Wii, and that one was pretty neat. Putting that into an Iron Man third-person shooter should be a no-brainer recipe for something fun, but it just doesn't quite make it. I'd say straight up, the gameplay isn't that bad. On the PSP, you're having to manually aim at things, and the lack of 2 analog sticks is really felt when you're pressing the face buttons to aim, but the motion integration on the Wii version feels pretty good. That is until you accidentally move off sensor and Iron Man or War Machine is like, I'ma go over here. You can feel a lot of effort was tossed into this, but it was rushed to all heck in order to come out around the same time as the movie. Levels have a distinct feeling with lots of explosions happening everywhere. Enemies come at you in waves, but the motion lock-on system makes them easier to take down. Unfortunately, there's only like 3 or 4 enemy types in the game will chug if you have more than a few of them on the screen. Not that you'll notice much anyways, because the pacing of the game is slow. Iron Man just kinda plods around, like a thunk, a thunk, a thunk. You can hover around and shoot things, and that's really where the game shines, but your health, shields, fuel, and extra ammo are all tied to the same resource, so you're limited in how much you can do it. Also, for some reason, Tony keeps finding himself in tight corridors, so he can't even really let loose. There are other missions where you fly forward a la Star Fox and have to blow dudes up. These are fun and they're pretty neat, but are over before you really get to sink your teeth in. It's very shallow. By the way, I hope you like visual novels. I know the 360 version has cutscenes, but I wasn't expecting Danganronpa. You get to upgrade your suit and select different loadouts for combat, which adds some replayability and customization, but most of these upgrades are simply weapon types. Yeah, it's stronger, but you probably won't notice very much. They try to do this neat thing where Tony's interfacing with the menu like he does in the films, but instead it ends up looking like this. Why does this look like feet? Overall, this version isn't awful, but it's not great either. It's a smidge glitchy here and there, but I think with a little more time, they could have done way better knowing their track record. But unfortunately, this is what we got. Next up, the Nintendo DS again. You know who's underrated? Kryptonite Games. These dudes were in charge of a ridiculous amount of portable games from the Game Boy Advance to the 3DS, some of which we've covered. Mostly licensed, a lot of them pretty lackluster, but there was the fun one here and there. Their version of Iron Man 2 kinda slides in the middle. Following the same story as the Wii version, Iron Man 2 for the DS is a side-scrolling platformer with 2 totally different playstyles. Both Stark and Rhodey suits take full advantage of the DS when you put them all together, one of which uses the face buttons and the other the stylus. You can run, punch, and shoot as Iron Man, but the control scheme for War Machine has you aiming manually and using different tap combinations to use various weapons. Tap for grenade, hold L and lock on for missile, long press for machine
machine guns. This is actually really fun, and these two schemes together are a pretty unique experience. I was never really much for motion and stylus types of games, but they really work for War Machine. I think his combat segments are more enjoyable than Iron Man's. Movement and stuff is fun, the story is decent, and the music kind of slaps, but the level design is where things kind of fall apart. You'll play through levels more than once to go through with each character, but a majority of that is clearing waves of enemies numbered on the screen until you get to the next area. It almost seemed like it was going to be a more concise side-scroller, or when you hit those branching paths, maybe even a Metroidvania. But I think it got scaled into this weird wave defense thing instead. It's not bad by any means, but it lacks that oomph to take it to the next level. It's also not voice acted like the first one, but it does have cutscenes that look like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. This one got close to being a good tie-in game, but its repetition and uninteresting level design really hold it back.
But we got one more chance, and we might as well end it with the biggest and baddest version of Iron Man 2. Again, you could tell that Sega, Marvel, and the developer really wanted you to know that this wasn't gonna be like the last one. They put a lot into marketing and like consumer knowledge to be like, hey, we promise it's not gonna be as crappy as the last one. So let's find out if it is. Iron Man 2. For the third time.
Developed by Sega Studios San Francisco, who are actually the same developer, Sega had rebranded Secret Level to this in hopes that with restructuring they could deliver what the original had promised. Unfortunately, the studio was announced to be shutting down on April 2nd, 2010, which is a full month before Iron Man 2 came out. So this really bodes well for the quality. Having now beaten it on the PS3 all these years later, I just want to say I really hate the 7th generation of consoles. There's plenty of cases of games that have such high ambitions that get absolutely demolished by system limitations, and I think this is definitely a case of it. If you look at a video of this thing being emulated, it's not bad at all. A little janky, but it's got a similar feeling to any mecha game from that era. While it still isn't a big open world, the levels feel more concise and laid out better. Mission objectives make sense, and the story has a flow that plays out in the gameplay. The problem is that everything runs like absolute butt on the PlayStation 3. Texture issues, check. Frame rate issues, check. Every transition resulting in the game and console freezing, making me think it crashed, you know it. The technical problems bogged this thing down way lower than it should have been, because a lot of the moment-to-moment gameplay is not bad at all. The controls are a lot, especially learning how to properly switch between hovering and flight mode. But once you get it down, you'll realize you can blast stuff on the go, and it's like, fun? Question mark? Iron Man 2 is like a weird attack helicopter game. It's like that one PS2 Robotech thing, where you swap between the flight modes. It's got a lot of neat stuff going on, but it's also like less than 3 hours long. Beyond technical stuff, you can tell that things were rushed. For some reason, they left a clip of Tony Stark flubbing a line
Charge the jets, Jarvis.
into an immediate Sonic reference.
We're going supersonic.
Yeah, this is how helicopters work, right? Seems legit. This is supposed to be the fully realized version of Fraction's story, but it feels like all the cutscenes go in and out at, well, Sonic speeds. Like, go, 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 next part, go! Any moment that's supposed to elicit any kind of emotion feels like a joke.
I am not. I am.
Okay, that was the most awful thing ever.
Beyond the story, you can see all the similarities between the versions, like with Tony's little floppy hand in the bottom corner trying to interface. We've got unlockable suits, tons of customization that actually does feel different in how you play, although accessing it through the menu is extremely bad. It's slow, it's clunky, and it's hard to see. The final boss against Ultimo is pretty neat when it's not freezing every transition, and overall, I see a game that was, once again, packed to the brim with potential. I like this a lot more than the first Iron Man game. I think it's got a lot more replay value. Whenever you finish the story, you've got enough points to fully deck out your loadouts, and your repulsors finally feel as strong as they do in the films. You're blasting away dudes like it's nothing. It's fun. I really think if Sega San Fran had another year on this, it could have been something truly special and not what we got. But at least we did get an exclusive Lamb of God song.
Hulk and Iron Man in the bag. And unfortunately, that means that, yes, Matt McMuscles was right, and Thor, the God of Thunder, is around the corner.
Sucker!
Chris Hemsworth is probably the best actor they could have chosen to play the role of Thor Odinson. The dude just looks like him. He's 6'3", made of solid steel, and has that thick Australian accent that might as well be what all Asgardians sound like. Wait, I mean Asgardian. Thor, simply Thor, came out in April of 2011, a year after Iron Man 2, and the this film was drastically different to those that came before it, mostly because a lot of the movie doesn't take place on Earth. It's a whole new world, which means you've got this wild mix of Norse mythos entangled with imagery very unlike Iron Man and Hulk. Then suddenly it's a fish out of water story with a big blonde man hanging out with Natalie Portman in America. This and its much less received sequel, Thor: The Dark World, were to me largely forgettable popcorn films, and I don't think the MCU audience really resonated with the God of Thunder until Taika Waititi took over with Thor: Ragnarok, which is probably still my favorite Marvel film. But this isn't about that, this is about video games, and let's get the worst one out of the way. Sega this time would team up with 3 different video game studios for 3 different games, split between the PlayStation 3, 360, Wii, Nintendo 3DS, and the regular DS. All the same box arts, but completely different titles that are all so fascinating. Mostly because besides being released at the same time as the movie, just like Iron Man 2, it doesn't follow the continuity and is also written by Matt Fraction. He'd actually go on to write Thor after this. I like the concept of them taking the basis of these movies and turning them into their own thing. It lets the creativity really shine as opposed to being trapped in pre-existing material. Though once again, somehow, despite being the actors, you know the spiel, how does this keep happening?
Spectacular, isn't it?
Thor: God of Thunder for the Xbox 360 and PS3.
We've been here before, not even that long ago, and I can safely say that yes, God of Thunder is still a bad game. I couldn't even play it again. I made my editor Joshy do it. Go ahead, say hi. I'm sorry. The next-gen version of this was done by Liquid Entertainment, who had a few neat games on their belt, like Lord of the Rings War of the Ring and Dungeons & Dragons Dragon's Shard, but they really missed the bus on this one. Despite having a pretty decent and unique story, despite having a really cool setting and nearly unlimited potential for a cool game, this licensed movie tie-in kind of became the poster child for bad ones of those. Reviews everywhere trashed this thing, and I don't blame them. It's technically a prequel to the film, one that has Thor killing a bunch of frost giants, causing a bunch of panic and nearly causing the destruction of Asgard. Normal god stuff, you know. It's really the gameplay and presentation that drags this down to unplayable levels. Thor might not be the worst game I've ever played, but it is the worst God of War clone. It's a mash fest, a glitchy one that has close to no feedback in your combos. It's got a plethora of technical issues, an extremely low amount of variety, and I sure hope you like QTE glory killing the same frost giants over and over. And I do mean over and over. The upgrade tree is pretty lame and doesn't have that much. There's unlockables like costumes, but more importantly, lightning colors. There's barely anything to do besides going level to level, and overall it's just a huge drag. Very rarely will I just say a game is bad and unplayable, but this is as close as it gets. It's unambitious, uninspired, glitchy, clunky, slow, disappointing, and you already know all of this. How a game less than 6 hours long can elicit all of these feelings is impressive, but Thor did it.
But you might not know about the 2 other versions. 2 different games that are very different in most aspects, and in some cases a little bit more enjoyable. Let's stop being high definition for a second and talk about Nintendo.
The other 2 versions of Thor: God of Thunder would be split Wii 3DS and the regular Nintendo DS. The Wii Wagglethon was developed by Redfly Studio, a group based in Austin, Texas that was responsible for some not very good games, but also the Wii port of Force Unleashed 2 with the Smash clone minigame. Their Thor: God of Thunder is way better. While Liquid Entertainment's version was getting slammed with 3s left and right, Redfly's got a much more respectable 5 to 6-ish, which sounds like a joke, but it's definitely way more playable. It follows the same story structure and levels, going from Asgard and Frost Giants to the Frost Grinder to Hell on Earth, but it's a much more well-rounded beat-em-up than its big brother. It does utilize a lot of Wiimote waggling. In fact, you need to swing in order to do your regular combos, which can be exhausting and irritating, but it's way more forgiving than Iron Man was. Thor lends itself to being more of a generic beat-em-up, and I think that's to its benefit. It plays it safe, but because it's at least relatively polished, it's not offensive and is a totally decent time. The visuals aren't crazy impressive, which makes sense considering it's also ported down to the 3DS, but the art style prevents it from having that uncanny 7th gen look. You know, the one where it's trying to look realistic, but it fails miserably. If you ever thought to yourself that a Wii game's cutscenes would look better than something on the PlayStation 3, here's one for you. It's still pretty mid, beatable in 4 hours, and clearly a cash grab, but it's not as devastatingly terrible as the other one. It's when we go to the normal Nintendo DS that things get strange. Yeah, did you know though the Nintendo DS was still getting games in 2011, the 3DS launch that year wasn't great. In fact, it was considered rough enough to the point that Nintendo gave away a set of apology games for early adopters. Some really good stuff that hasn't even been ported yet. Metroid Fusion? Not for you. Well, the Nintendo DS would get a licensed Thor game by none other than WayForward. Yep, this keeps happening. WayForward always finds their way into the licensed game realm, but they usually do a great job. And they do it again. In what is absolutely becoming a pattern, the portable DS tie-in is the best of the bunch. This time around, Thor is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, but one that's closer to ActRaiser or Ghosts and Goblins than the fast pace of Hulk. The sprite work is gorgeous, and it's one of the only DS games I've seen take full advantage of the second screen in a unique manner. Typically, developers would use one of these screens as a total throwaway, but instead both screens account for all of the action. It's really cool. I've never seen a beat-em-up like that. It's got all of the WayForward staples, great animation, good music, a polished experience, and clearly it's more than they had to do. Enemies are beefy in this, so you'll spend time as Thor doing longer combos, dodge rolling, and juggling dudes in order to keep things rolling. There's nice portrait art to showcase its original story, and while it's also canonically separate from the movie, it feels right in place. Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston really became the face of these characters, huh? The only major downsides is that there's not much progression in your Thorness. You'll get runes as upgrades, but they're really just basic buffs that don't give you game-changing movesets and abilities like you would probably want. There's a lot of potential here, and a lot of it gets realized, but at the end of the day, it's still a simple 2 or 3 hour long beat 'em up romp, so there's only so much you can do with that. Still, exceptional for a licensed game, one that probably had all of the time constraints that the other ones had, and definitely for one that shares the same box art as this. It might drag on a little bit with how spongy the enemies feel, but hey, at least we can leave Thor happy. We got one more film and superhero left, and it's time to get patriotic.
Thank the Lord we're done with Thor, because it's only up from here. As most of you probably know, the last Phase 1 film to get a game was Captain America, based off the MCU film Captain America: The First Avenger. Coming out a mere 2 months after Thor, it's time to go back to World War II.
As a kid, and for the longest time, I used to think that Captain America was lame. Maybe I just didn't like that Super Nintendo game, or the fact that I mostly knew him for screaming "Stars and Stripes!" But give me an X-Men any day. Maybe I just didn't like country-based superheroes. I can't say I was a Captain Britain fan growing up. It seems like the film audiences were initially soft on Steve Rogers as well, as Cap only beats the Incredible Hulk for the lowest grossing Marvel film. It was an origin story showing the creation of the super soldier, as he goes and makes things political for the rest of us. Chris Evans was the perfect fit for this role, but the movie was ultimately one of those ones you saw and just went, yeah, that was good. America. It wasn't until Winter Soldier that I really got it, though. That movie ruled. So, video games. Once again, we've got 3 different titles to deal with, all of which share the name Captain America Super Soldier. One on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, another on the Nintendo DS, and a third on the Wii and new challenger, the Nintendo 3DS. All of them but the 3DS port will come out on the same week as the film, and looking at the reviews, this is the best it would get. There's also an iOS game that released around the same time, but it wasn't published by Sega. In fact, most of these games had mobile versions and maybe cheap Gameloft tie-ins, but were developed separately from Sega, so yeah, don't worry about those.
We wouldn't know it at the time, but this was going to be Sega's last chance to try and move the needle, so let's go ahead and work our way up with the Nintendo DS version.
Remember Kryptonite Games? Well, they're back and at it again, and honestly, did a really good job. Super Soldier on the DS is a level-based action platformer that, while kind of basic, is a totally decent game. It's got a variety of gameplay styles. You've got side-scrolling beat-em-ups, stealth missions, and auto-scrollers, all of which is rounded out by a fun enough combo system that'll let you go nutty juggling dudes. There's lots of costumes to unlock, it's voice-acted, and it looks pretty good. This feels like a much more realized version of Iron Man 2, but also one that you can break pretty easily by exploiting shield throwing. Seriously, this thing goes bonkers. It's definitely not perfect, especially considering the incredibly high difficulty spikes in some of the combat segments and the very short length, but this is a definite improvement to Kryptonite's previous Marvel attempt. The biggest issue I got is definitely the lack of a varied soundtrack, as the floaty, rah-rah generic music gets on your nerves. Though I do love the little cutscenes they animated. They really gotta stop making the Hydra agents hot though.
Then we got the Wii version. This also came out on the 3DS a couple months later, and apparently those are like really easy to mod, but I threw mine in the garbage like 5 years ago and haven't looked back. Still have my Wii U though. weird.
Captain America Super Soldier for the Wii, this time developed once again by High Voltage Software. You can tell that Sega had a bit of faith in the developers of the Iron Man 2 games, and I mean, it sure beats that Thor life. This game is funny. Spoilers, the Xbox 360 and PS3 versions of Cap are noticeably way bigger budget than anything they put out prior. The scale, the cutscene direction, we'll go back to it. Well, all three of these games share the same story, taking place in the middle of the film while Captain America is going after Red Skull and Hydra. But for the Wii version, they decided to ditch any realism and give it this goofy cartoon style, like Steve Rogers' Unga Bunga. What's going on with your everything? The game starts quite literally in the trenches of World War II as you fight your way through a battlefield, into Hydra territory, castles, prisons, you name it. The Wii version of this game is a level-based action platformer that works way better than it should have. It's possible I have a bit of a Stockholm Syndrome situation from playing all of these, but this game is an acceptable licensed title that was clearly aimed at kids, and I think it succeeds in that. This is going to become much more evident with the HD version of this game, but Batman Arkham Asylum is woven into its combat DNA with a very similar attack and counter combo system. But instead of throwing batarangs, you're tossing shields, deflecting bullets, and punching through walls. This is a video game-ass game too. Your combo system functions similarly, but it'll have crazy names for your hits like Patriot Attack. I had way more fun with this one than I thought I would. It's absolutely the best, I guess, last generation licensed tie-in of the bunch. The reviews weren't great, obviously, and I think at the time people were using all of these as a collective community punching bag, but I do think that this is a passable experience. It's just, you know, Arkham Asylum for kids. They just gotta stop making the Hydra agents hot, come on.
There's one video game left today, and I'm kind of glad it's the last one. Obviously, you know I'm talking about Captain America Super Soldier, and here it is on the PS3. It's also on the Xbox 360, and, well, I kind of wish I played it on the Xbox.
I'd kind of forgotten that most multi-platform games were generally better on the Xbox 360, and looking across the pond into Microsoft land with its better frame rates, I once again sit around and curse the cell processor for making everything run like a PS3 game. But even so, I went and got the platinum. Whoops. Captain America Super Soldier HD, I guess, was developed by Next Level Games. You might have heard the name before. They're responsible for Super Mario Strikers, Punch-Out, Luigi's Mansion 3. They generally work closely with Nintendo these days, but every now and then they'd take on something else. Super Soldier was one of them. I think this game's entire existence and premise was based on one thing, and that's the success of Batman Arkham Asylum. When that came out in 2009, it really upped the ante for quality in licensed video games, and suddenly everything Sega was making felt cheap, rushed, and of course, poor quality. And you can bet your sweet thing Marvel noticed that. This only came out a few months after Thor, but the budget and quality difference is pretty outstanding. You can tell that they quite literally pointed fingers at Rocksteady's masterpiece and said, do that, and I think it paid off. If you try to distill it down as lamely as possible, Super Soldier is a discount Marvel Arkham. It plays very similarly, even has the same open map feel where you can backtrack to find stuff. The combat is extremely identical with flips, parries, dodges, power moves. You've even got to knock dudes out on the ground by holding the same two buttons. Y'all know I love this word. It's about as close to a clone that the old Bats is gonna get. And I also think it's better for that. You're obviously gonna have to look at all this footage and imagine a more solid frame rate on a better console than what I played, or heck, even emulated, where you can really see this thing not get bogged down by stinky 7th gen consoles. You've got like the entire cast reprising their roles here, by the way. Chris Evans even uses this game as a positive experience that influenced the way that he does fight scenes as Captain America. It just seems like this was a good time.
Captain America to headquarters. Come in. Over.
Thanks, man.
The game itself is much better than you would expect from, well, the entire concept. It is linear, it is pretty short, and it's a little bland to look at considering the World War II setting, but this kind of felt like Sega was starting to move in the right direction. It's not perfect, it's got some pacing issues, some of the combat sequences are a bit convoluted, and it's got its fair share of glitches. Although it's mostly funny glitches like ragdolling or whatever I'm looking at here. Its biggest issues are the technical ones that become really evident when the cutscenes get a little more complicated. Like, unfortunately hot Hydra agent here, bringing it down to like 5 frames a second. Woohoo! But for a game that's beatable in 6 to 7 hours with a decent amount of replayability, a fun enough combat system, and a premise that at the end of the day is just a licensed tie-in movie game, It's pretty alright. Probably should have just been $30, but you know how it is. You're just obviously gonna falter when you're put up against Arkham, X-Men Origins Wolverine, any of the many Spider-Mans, or heck, Injustice was just around the corner. All three versions of Super Soldier, like the film, didn't bring in anywhere near as many sales, and despite Cap being a slight uptick in the quality, this would be Sega's last MCU game. A lot of people were expecting there to be an Avengers game considering how consistent they were up until that point, but there was never an announcement, and on March 6th, 2012, it came to light that that would be it. It's really no surprise considering how many SKUs they put out that were poorly received. That also means that they canceled a few titles, including an open world Iron Man game that Avalanche Studios was working on. The people behind Just Cause and Mad Max. That could have been awesome. There was even an Avengers game that Marvel teamed up with THQ to make that got the can as well. The first phase of MCU licensed projects began with Iron Man, ended with Captain America, and well, that would actually be it. No big budget Avengers, no Guardians of the Galaxy, only the occasional mobile game until they just stopped making them across the board. It is a shame that we never got a proper Avengers game. I mean, there's not even a single video game on the Avengers that's ever come out. And that's crazy considering it's like one of the highest grossing and comic franchises of all time. Wow. Sega's time with Marvel's superheroes is a pretty tumultuous one, but it's also something that changed the game. After this, the cheap licensed game kind of disappeared. There's still one every now and then, mostly by really small publishers, but I distinctly remember Thor being the height of people clamoring for this to end. Even if most of them kinda suck, like 11 out of 14 of them, they sure don't make games like this anymore.
And well, that's all for today. Every single Sega MCU video game, done. We've reached critical video length here. I think this is over 50 minutes now, so I don't know I keep doing it. I gotta take a nap. This is one of those cases where there's a lot of examples of games that I think were really bogged down by the 7th gen of consoles. A lot of these games are now emulatable because of, technology getting better, and you can see like, oh, this is what they were trying to do, but they had to put it on a PlayStation 3 and that's why it sucks. As much as I miss some of these, thankfully nowadays we've got big studios taking these big properties on, like Insomniac with Wolverine and Spider-Man, or Rocksteady with Batman and Suicide Squad. I'm pretty excited for Marvel's Sons coming out in the future, but I don't want to, wake up and have that suck. So, I don't know, wake me up when it comes out and let me know if I was right or wrong. I hope it's good. Anyways, I've been Austin and now I must embark on the big sleep. Make sure to check out today's sponsor, Factor, to support the channel or do it personally on Patreon or being a YouTube member. And make sure to catch me next time for the love of everything that's holy. I hopefully make a video that's less than 30 minutes long. I'm trying. Just remember, Sega rules. Even when Sega sucks, it's fun. Unless you're Thor.
Thank you so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to A. Vox, Aaron Kwolek, Blackfoot Ferret, Chris Shelton, Christopher Oliva, Darren Newton, Doug Prince, DX Buster, David Molnar, Elijah, GM Pinks, Hey Quiggles, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Kieran Arter, Nick Irving, Ryan Talbert, and Shazan. Thank you very much for your generous support. This is my longest video now. Now I must go to sleep. Stay tuned for the next video, and in the meantime, click on my links.
Why are you laughing?
Thank you for watching. I love you. Bye.